So I'm going to record today about Addison's disease and the hormones that are involved with Addison's disease. So to start with, we'll talk about the hormones a little bit, and we're talking about the secretion of ACTH. So with ACTH, this is an adrenal cortex secreting hormone that controls cortisol, or we also can call it glucocorticoids. It also controls aldosterone and the secretion of sex hormones from the adrenal cortex. But ACTH itself is secreted from the pituitary gland. Also, we look at with the secretion of ACTH and cortisol and aldosterone and secretion of sex hormones, what do those do? So cortisol metabolizes carbohydrates in your body and fats and proteins. It also suppresses your immune system and also controls the body's stress response. And aldosterone, its primary function in the body is to promote sodium and water reabsorption into the body and potassium excretion through the kidneys. So you pee it out. And then, of course, sex hormones are with like secondary sex characteristic development, body hair, those kind of things. So when we're looking at Addison's disease, a way that I always thought was helpful to remember it was that something needs to be added. There's not enough of something, and that thing that there isn't enough of is secretion of ACTH. So if I don't have enough ACTH, I am not going to have enough cortisol, sex hormones, and aldosterone, because ACTH affects all of those things. So if I don't have enough ACTH, I don't have enough of those things either. So I'm going to be looking at signs and symptoms that affect those. So what can cause Addison's disease? Well, there are primary things, secondary things, and tertiary things. So the primary thing that can happen is an insufficiency in your adrenal gland. So something's messed up with your adrenal gland, okay? And where do the adrenal glands live? They're that little like hat that sits on top of your kidneys. And so something's just not right with that particular part of your body. So something else that can cause a problem is, what if your doctor has put you on some sort of glucocorticoid for 2 weeks or longer? It can actually suppress your body's natural ability to secrete ACTH. Okay, and so if you have something that's messing up your ability to naturally produce ACTH, then it's going to mess up that same process. Okay. So when we have that, then there is going to be, or let me rephrase it. By the time you actually are showing signs and symptoms of an adrenal cortex problem or low ACTH, and the like problems that happen as like fallout issues because of that, you've lost approximately about 90% of your adrenal gland function. Okay, so what are some signs and symptoms then of Addison's disease. So, interestingly enough, dark kind of bronze pigmentation of the skin actually happens because of this. So, if the adrenal glands aren't working and we have low cortisol, the body's going to be like, oh, something's not right. I've got to fix it. And so the pituitary gland is going to say, guys, we've got to get working here. And so it's going to hyperstimulate the pituitary gland to release more ACTH. And because of that stimulation of more release of ACTH, it's going to, as a result, naturally have a stimulation, or hypersecretion of MSH. And MSH is when you have more melanin, or it secretes melanocyte stimulating hormone, the MSH, and it makes it so your skin tone gets darker because of that extra melanin that's released. So that's where you get that darker bronzed looking hyperpigmentation of the skin that can come along with Addison's disease. Then you also, because of having decreased cortisol and decreased aldosterone, you can feel weak. You can experience weight loss. You can feel more tired, get nausea, abdominal pain going on in conjunction with gastroenteritis, and some emotional lability along with that. There can also be decreased pubic and axillary hair in conjunction with the decrease of the sex hormones that are being produced. And people can be dehydrated and have hypotension as a result of that dehydration due to that decrease in aldosterone that causes a decrease in sodium and water that comes from that. So how do we diagnose Addison's disease? Well, we can test somebody's hypothalamus or their pituitary gland axis and adrenal cortex. We can also check their electrolytes, the sodium and the potassium, see how those levels are going. We can do some imaging like CT scans and MRIs, and take a look at the actual adrenal gland and see if there's some shrinking with the adrenal gland, and that would be more indicative of an autoimmune dysfunction. Or if there is an enlargement of it, it's more likely because there's some infection going on in the adrenal gland itself. To treat it, we can give IV fluids with some glucose in there. We can give cortisol, obviously, since that is going to drop. With the cortisol, you can give it in a form of Solu-Cortef, which is also known as hydrocortisone sodium succinate, or you can give dexamethasone, which is also known as Decadron. And then once again, just to kind of reiterate like what the assessments would be that a nurse would look at, decreased blood pressure. And the reason for that decreased blood pressure, I'm low on sodium and water. I'm dehydrated. That patient's dehydrated. So it makes sense then that the blood pressure is going to be low. Then why are they also low? Because there's a lack of aldosterone. And aldosterone is in that RAS system that controls water and water levels in the body. I'm also going to be on assessment watching for an irregular heartbeat. Why am I looking for an irregular heartbeat or watching for that? Because of my potassium levels. because if I am not getting rid of enough potassium through peeing it out, then I'm holding on to potassium, and I can end up having problems with my heart rhythms because of having too much potassium in the system. I also am going to want to assess the patient's intake and output to monitor those levels of hydration or dehydration, conversely. I'm going to be wanting to check on lab values. I want to look at the hematocrit, the hemoglobin, the BUN. All of these things are going to rise with dehydration. And why are they going to rise with dehydration? Because the water leaves, but the solutes in the water stay. It's kind of like having a salt lake, a lake full of salt that dehydrates, but the water leaves, but the salt stays on the bottom of the lake bed. Okay, so it's concentrated. Okay, it's super concentrated. So your BUN is going to be high. Your H&H are going to be high. And it's not because the H&H changed or the BUN changed. It's because the water level changed because the patient's more dehydrated. Okay. The patient also will likely have weaker muscles. And this is because of a decrease in cortisol as well, because it's a stress hormone. It helps us fight stress. But we don't want too little cortisol, but we also don't want too much cortisol. Cortisol we just want in that happy homeostatic, like happy space. Okay, we want it right in that good spot. Okay, and then of course, like we talked about before with the introduction of MSH levels due to changes in our hormone levels, we could have possible changes in skin color. So hopefully this is a nice quick review of Addison's disease. Just follow up with me on my business page of Study Nursing with Nurse Amy, and feel free to book an appointment with me if you have any questions. And always remember that this is not for diagnostic purposes, just to help you try and understand disease processes better. Thank you.